Biomass starts off very vague and provokes a lot of questions. The only things that are given to you are the controls, which are told through messages on the ground, similar to Dark Souls. And as we dive deeper into this game, you'll be hearing a lot more about Dark Souls comparisons, more so Bloodborne in particular. But this game is definitely inspired by that series. So as you make your way through just killing people that are chilling in the room, you'll end up seeing a ghostly, distorted man killing all of these soldiers. So you definitely know that something paranormal is going on here. But don't worry, you get to kill those soldiers too when you get to learn how to parry and to block projectiles. Once you learn your cool new moves, Emo Guts finds you to be too powerful and must kill you, so he starts breaking down the walls while you wait for an elevator that comes in at just the right time. From the tutorial, we can tell that this game has a tone of despair and creepiness, and later on, once you reach the first element, you'll realize that you're living in a post-apocalypse. The world is nothing but ruined skyscrapers that loom over a perpetual flood. There's also a lighthouse that serves as a central point to the story. It's kind of like the first flame in Dark Souls. You'll find out more about the story through dialogue, and one person in particular, I'll call her the Oracle Lady for simplicity, that explains a lot of the game, which is much needed. You'll find her in the first settlement that you come across, and she'll implicitly say that you're on a pilgrimage to the lighthouse, which is the most that you're going to get on your character's backstory. She gives some other lore about the tower that you're in, but more importantly is the workstation explanation. Workstations serve as like rest points that allow you to heal, buy items, and upgrade your stats. Biomass serves as the currency for both buying and upgrading. However, to buy items, you need to find the item scheme in the world before you can buy it. One thing about the workstation too is that resyncing or healing yourself doesn't reset the enemies. They stay dead, so you can pretty much just clear out a room, go back and heal, then go on and explore more. Also, if you die to a fall where your biomass is unclaimable, they'll instead appear right next to the workstation, which makes for a good way to teleport back to spend your biomass if you have a lot that you don't want to risk losing. Once you get your sense of direction from the Oracle Lady, you can start exploring the tower, and I do recommend talking to everyone for bits and pieces of the lore, along with looking at the environment to conjure up your own narrative of what this world is like. Speaking of looks, this game has a neat aesthetic to it. It's vibrant and it makes for a good worn-out futuristic setting. Some areas look like your typical cyberpunk dystopia, while others take inspiration from Eldritch horror. The settings match how the people act, so it feels like everything has a nice flow to it. The zipline ride gives a nice example of what the setting looks and feels like. Even though the visuals and how it mirrors the setting nicely, I wish that the soundtrack had more to it. Most of the time it felt forgettable. The first track in the first element sounds like a lo-fi beats to study and relax to, which I believe does a disservice to the rest of the game. There are some areas where the music is much better and the boss tracks are an example of this, but I feel like the music could be improved upon to help drive the tone that's set up by the game's other aspects. The sound effects are nice though and please my monkey brain by providing good feedback from the actions going on the screen. They could be made more impactful, like when you're slapping swords with an enemy, but I would say that they're on the right path of being even better. They just need a little bit of fine-tuning. Speaking of slapping hard shiny sticks together, it's about time that I talk about the gameplay. The areas in this game are set up like a Metrovania where you have to keep a mental map of where everything is, and especially how things connect, and you have shortcuts that lead back to previous areas. But I would struggle to call this a Metrovania. And that's because it feels like there's a lot of different ways to go, but really there's only one progression path and the rest are dead ends and optional in terms of moving from one area to the next or to advance the plot. Also, you don't return to areas. You may backtrack a bit, but it would still be within the same vicinity. So this game is rather linear in terms of where you're going to go. It does open up a bit more once you beat the game once, but I'll get to that later. Although I will say that Biomass is more like a 2D cyberpunk Bloodborne in terms of like how you progress through the game and how the gameplay is. For example, to progress, you usually just fight through enemies or a boss and get key items. And this game encourages an aggressive playstyle where you have this thing called streak and you build it up from fighting enemies. It serves as your main source of healing, at least until later in the game, because you only have a limited amount of healing potions that you get in the beginning, and you won't be able to get more of them until you find the scheme that allows you to buy more of those potions. And it slowly dwindles as time goes on, and if the streak is about half filled, it stays filled at that point. But if it's above or below that threshold, it slowly depletes unless you build it up from, say, clashing lightsabers with an enemy, or hitting a force field, or these little iRobot tentacle things that you can find around, or otherwise you can just fight for your life, literally. Besides dueling with the fates, you also have backstabs that you can do if you sneak up behind an enemy. There's also a parry mechanic, but it's only limited to one weapon. And you can also hit off projectiles. Except for rocket blasts, you're going to get fucked if you try and block off that. So why is parrying restricted to one weapon? That's because each weapon has its own special attack, and the default one that you get at the beginning of the game has the parrying mechanic. Everything else has its own special move. There's also guns that you can use, and in the beginning they feel like cheating because you can just cheese enemies by using them. But depending on how you build your character, they're going to be less useful later on in the game and vice versa. Also, there's items that you can use like grenades or mods that you can find that give you like a bonus in one area but disadvantage in another. There's plenty of variety in your arsenal in terms of weapons, mods, and items that you can use. And usually if you see an enemy that's using a weapon that you don't have, you can find it somewhere in the world and have it as your own. Before moving on to the enemies, I have some other things to add in. Rolling doesn't use any stamina. The only things that do are special attacks like parrying and using your gun to shoot. Otherwise, you can keep rolling like in every duel in Dark Souls. And going back to the streak mechanic for a moment, it's a shame that parries nor backstabs give streak, as it seems appropriate to reward a skillful and risky move or managing to sneak up on an enemy, but they don't, so you really just have the damage and no healing from it, which your healing can already be highly limited until you get the healing item scheme later on in the game. But on your first run, you won't have that until like at the end of that first run. The problem with this is not because it's limited, but because the button to interact with something is the same button to use that streak mechanic to get your healing. So if you thought something was interactable and it wasn't, you just lost your main source of healing, which could screw you up. So you should keep in mind that if you think something is interactable, to hold down the up button. That way you don't end up hurting yourself. There's at least still a good amount of enemy variety from area to area that keeps things interesting, but there's these flying enemies that are just annoying. You don't have any way to jump nor a way to aim an attack upwards, even though you have a gun. So you have to wait until they come down while they're up there just sending V2 rockets on your ass. The bosses are varied too, from humans to monstrosities. Some are easier than others, mainly because of their movesets. For example, one boss pulls out a turret, but you can go right behind her and avoid her entire attack while you plow your sword into her from behind. Then there are some other bosses where their attacks are harder to dodge or have combos that will devastate you. There are some bullshit moments though, like getting gangbanged while you're coming up from a ladder, but these moments are not frequent. A tip for the ladders though is to attract the enemies and get them to follow you, then get them to move away from the ladder, go back to the ladder, climb up it, and then that should give you some breathing room to pick them off. The story of Biomass does a good job at giving you bits and pieces of it to keep you wanting to figure it out. There's enough mystery and world building to keep you interested in the lore. It may not be everyone's cup of tea to have the story be unclear at first, especially with how the narrative is given through only visuals and dialogue. You won't see all of it in one playthrough, and the clothing mechanic also adds a neat layer to it too. So the clothing in this game is not armor, but rather a disguise that unlocks changes and prevents dialogue, even when you talk to regular enemies. It doesn't always reveal more about the overall story, but it can give more of like the world building of the personal lives of the people. For example, if you talk to the people from one tower that live in a city-like environment, you can hear about how they view the people from the other more rundown and destroyed tower. So you can definitely see inequality within this world, like the city settlement is having parties, having wet t-shirt contests, using up all of their energy to party under the orderly watch of the Duke. So they waste limited resources in a apocalyptic land, while the other settlements are struggling to get by. As you can see, this game is primed for a Vidi Vidia to come in and just start deciphering the lore for everybody. Unfortunately, there isn't one yet, but there is a Discord server where people discuss and uncover the story because this game never reveals everything directly. It's a very show don't tell type of thing, so if you're interested in more, go ahead and just join the Discord. But sometimes this game is too vague on where you need to go, because sometimes I'd end up hitting a dead end, having to go back where I came from because some unrelated thing happened back there. The problem is it's just unintuitive. Like I'd always expect progress to be forward in like this 2D type of thing, and it sets itself up to be that way too because you have all these different paths but only one actually leads to progression. But sometimes you do have to go back where you came from because some thing activated back there that you didn't really have any type of like notice to it. So if you're in doubt, just go backwards and see if anything happened. And another tip, you can climb this box and you may not have guessed it because you've only climbed like one other thing back in the tutorial, so you've probably forgotten that you can climb stuff when you reach this point in the game. Another thing too is that there's this hole that you have to drop into that looks like it would kill you, but falling into it is progression. And the hole is like right after a long stretch of having to fight through like end game enemies. So you're not wanting to risk something like that. So this game probably could use some helpful indicators that tell you can do certain things. Granted, the developer has patched in things like this, like with the box, you put an item on top of it. That way it can help nudge the player to notice that, hey, you can get on top of this thing. Once you beat Biomass, you go through the game again, kind of like a time loop, but this time it allows for new interactions and paths to go on because you have your old gear with you, which can unlock new story elements for you to explore. During each loop, you can trigger a certain storyline through optional and hidden triggers. Even not doing some things like deciding not to go a certain path or talk to a certain person can lead to new experiences. Each boss is touted to have a secret phase that can be triggered or skipped too. So replayability is high and it helps mitigate the repetition. Each loop takes about 4 hours depending on your path and if you get stuck on a boss, but otherwise it'll be 4 hours or less. This is pretty much the end of the video, but I do want to put in a tip for a certain boss. So obviously spoilers ahead. So if you do get stuck on that boss, and you'll probably know it when you do, feel free to come back and watch the end of this video. Nonetheless, thank you for watching if you're getting off now. So the boss is the Distorted Man, and I just want to give some tips on how to beat him because it seems like a lot of people have trouble trying to beat him. I definitely did too, so hopefully this helps. First, focus on breaking his stamina through the lightsaber clashes by using the good old Dark Souls 3 Dark Sword strat of just spamming R1. Then once his stamina is out and his guard is down, just riposte him and you'll deal a lot of damage, just like in Sekiro. You can use the special attack of the Drone Blade to make yourself distorted and in turn deal more damage to him. Just watch out because it does slowly drain your health. Once you're finished using the Drone Blade for the distorted effect, you can use the special attack again to get rid of the distortion, that way you don't keep continuously losing your health when you don't need to. And if you need more health, I'd recommend hitting the force field before you enter in the area, that way you can get a full max bar of the streak going, and save your death spot in the boss room for extra heals for when you need it. The times that I felt that were the best to spam R1 would be whenever he's doing like the Michael Jackson moonwalk thing that he does. Make sure you give yourself enough space away from him, that way you can turn around and just start spamming R1 against him. That should help break his stamina. And of course, right before the battle starts, if you died a couple of times beforehand, then his back will be turned to you. So that gives just a free critical hit for you to do. Otherwise, I'll just recommend avoiding all of his other attacks. I do want to especially thank Rob Kogai for recommending Biomass to me. I had fun playing through it, and this video probably wouldn't have been made without him. So for anyone that enjoyed this video, we have him to thank for. That's it for this one. Hopefully you found this video helpful, and thank you for watching. See ya.